Hey everyone, welcome back for Gemini 3. Nice to have you all. KD, nice to have you back. David Fisher from In the First Place back with us again. Thank you, David, for being here. So real briefly, we'll just say KD's back. In the last time that we were here with everyone, we were heading to Norwalk. So now we're back from Norwalk and it's taken this long for me to integrate the experience, to be honest. How are you feeling?
It was so delightful and so lovely to meet people. It was probably the most social that I've been in 3 years, but then quickly followed by the most lonely time in 3 years because I got COVID. So that was super fun. But it was just really lovely to get to meet some of our teachers from far away in person, people who we've only interacted with online, including each other.
I know, it was so awesome and natural to spend time with you in the
I'm jealous.
David, next year,
David,
soon. Oh my God, we were like thinking of you the entire time. We're like, David this, David that, David would have loved this, Maybe we can put together like a little thing on the channel with some of our picks and some of our thoughts, but today we're gonna keep it brief just because you guys didn't come here to hear about Norwalk, but we just wanted to follow up with everyone because we announced that we were going and everything. So yeah, it was really beautiful. I cried many times. I've been touched in ways that I can't put into words my gratitude, as well as yeah, just meeting like Demetra George in person or whatever. Like, to me, that was just like something that I can't, put into words, and something I'm so grateful for. So thank you, Norwalk, and thank you everybody for making our experience super welcoming, as well as if you saw us there and we didn't get to connect, stay tuned, maybe next time, and let us know if you were there in the comments below. And maybe look out, maybe we'll do just like a little slideshow of a couple pics and a couple like more personal stories at some point. Let's see if we can pull that off. But otherwise, how do you guys feel about just diving right in? How does that feel?
Let's do this.
Let's do this. Okay, so Austin, in his book 36 Faces, The History, Astrology, and Magic of the Decans, calls this decan the executioner's sword. T. Susan Chang calls it famous last words. And so we've got the lovers again being represented by Mercury here, and then, or as the Gemini card. And then we've got, so the ruler of this decan is the sun. So we've covered the sun card before in some depth. I don't know if we'll do as much justice as when we introduced it the first time. So we've got the sun, and then we've got the last or the final in this swords series, the 10 of swords. And KD is gonna, and T. Susan Chang are gonna give us a little rundown on how those work. So yeah, and then in case I don't, I just wanted to share this little Mercury card that I thought was really beautiful. Again, from the Serpent Fire deck, she does like a couple secret cards. She does a Saturn and a Mercury, and I just love the winged serpents here that I wanted, in case I forget, to show, which kind of embody a little bit about the three of the decans Gemini. So let me read some of my notes from Austin Coppock's layout of this, which is just super beautiful.
And we also got to meet him in person, which was, sorry.
It was crazy.
I had to say it.
No, I mean, it was crazy. It's like a lifelong goal. And obviously he's got a huge fan base. So I'm kind of like a background person when it comes to, going up to, it's like famous people, like, it's like famous people for like astrologers. It's like the fame is limited, but still for me, I'm just like, oh, like I wouldn't want to bother them or whatever. Yes, we met Austin.
We get starstruck.
Yeah, well, or just like super deep respect of being like, oh my God, like there's the people that influence us so much. So yes, Austin Coppock was there. He did 2 lectures. They were absolutely profound. He talked about the decades. You guys should check it out. Also his one on Friday about like remedial magic. Both of his talks were epic. We didn't go to the paid Thursday night talk, which is also for sale. But all the ones that we saw, both of them were absolutely worth paying the $15 or whatever it is, to watch. And then Caitlin Coppock was there. We got a couple chances to talk with her. So she is the Sphere and Sundry goddess. Hey, Austin and Caitlin, we love you. Okay, so yes, Austin was there. The book wasn't there yet. Hopefully soon. So again, thank you, Austin, for being at these conferences and making yourself available, and for, covering the Decans in such a way that we can use these source materials for something really grounded to bring us through the Decans. So Austin has to say, and I guess, God, trigger warning again, Gemini Decans. That's all I'm gonna say.
One big trigger warning.
Last time we did this trigger warning and I made chapters and all the things, I think this is gonna be a little bit more low key, but I don't know. And just trigger warning, Gemini season, I guess. So here we see the final bloom of the internal and external polarization. We're kind of pushed towards extremes here. Now we've got the choice between the twins. Instead of like reconciling and seeing all these polarities, we've got these deep kind of life-threatening choices. And here he says, Abel must die and Castor needs to be struck down. We get this kind of seasonal pivot, which again, reminding us, or calling back the fact that this is the last and final decan before the start of the Thema Mundi. So this is the last kind of throes of the Thema Mundi. And so we're going to start to talk about the light and darkness of the summer solstice and what that has to do with like the tipping of the light. So this seasonal pivot focuses on the yearly sacrifice of the sun and the summer solstice as the sun's power declines, shrinking every day until winter begins. At the summer solstice, the Lord of Light is killed and his darker brother takes up his reign. In the third decan of Gemini, it sees Castor fall, Cain slay Abel, and Set slay Horus. It's the climax of these stories' polarities. The decan brings in the myth of the twins to an end by terminating one of them. And then Austin will go on to tell the story of Castor and Pollux, and how when Castor is slain, his brother trades in some of his immortality with Castor. So each day they spend one, day in Hades or hell and one in Olympus or heaven, and they keep switching places like this, even though one is like essentially murdered or embodied. And this is how they reconcile, or this is in this Greek myth, how Austin talks about them reconciling this truly equal thing. So I don't really know why one has to be killed in order for us to find that, but that's what we have here, is that kind of like myth of the polarity being mitigated and this dynamic unity being achieved. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about the 36 years of the zodiac, this fragmentary Greek text that we've talked about a lot. The exactor of justice, there's this myth, and I can't say like any of the names, so I'm just gonna kind of go beyond, but this myth of justice, of the Furies, and hopefully everyone will be able to read that story in 36 Spaces when it comes out shortly. So then, we just have the sword as not just this instrument of terror that is like gonna kill or cut off the head, but also when we face such a blade, we understand the consequences of our choices. And that's kind of where he's going here. The dualities have permutated far beyond the shades of gray, and ultimate extremes or extremities are found here, taken to the point that they cannot truly coexist. Day and night must split time. They cannot take place simultaneously. And then he goes on to say that same thing about like good and evil, the body and the spirit, and just choices and judgments and exactments. This is the very last decan again of the Egyptian concept of time, which is kind of bringing in that Thema Mundi arrangement. And then he concludes by talking about the comedy and the tragedy, where the wise laugh even as the executioner's blade descends. So bringing in kind of that juggling and that humor that Mercury can embody, as well as the sun, I thought in this, like laughing even as the executioner's blade descends is kind of has this ring of eternality that we see with the sun. So sun not only being selection, but this kind of like eternalness of like the death of the body doesn't mean the death of the soul. And I think, or whatever, however you want to, you know, whatever words or concepts you want to use to embody that kind of idea, just the shorthand for it, that we have this cyclical or eternal view of time with those choices. So I think that's what I've got as far as just like a little bit of a takeaway or just an introduction of what I took from Austin's rating in this Decan. KD, do you want to open with some of the card stuff or start to pivot towards how T. Susan Chang works with this? And I just wanted to say, if we haven't said explicitly, I'm sure we have, but if we haven't said this explicitly, like Austin and T. Susan Chang, and we've said this, but let's just reiterate, they did this podcast together, and T. Susan Chang has also said that her book was a companion piece through her thinking as she was going through the Decans herself and through reading Austin's book. So that's why we chose these books to guide us through the Decan walk and to share with all of you, is they already had this relationship when we started. So that's what kind of, why we're using these as the backbone of the practice, just to reiterate for everyone. So,
and they make such a profound backbone to a Decanic walk like this, that, you know, even if you're iterating off of those two books and thinking about it, it's so rich philosophically, covers kind of the spectrum of understandings for each of these Decans, signs and tarot cards. So
yeah, for sure. It's really kind of beautiful with Austin laying down the foundations of the Hellenistic, like heirs of the zodiac as his foundation. And then he mentions the cards. And then T. Susan Chang kind of takes, as a tarot reader, takes that and enriches it and elaborates. And so, yeah, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, sure. So again, the cards are the Lovers for Gemini, the Sun as a planetary ruler of this specific Decan, and then the Ten of Swords as the Lord of Ruin. So you might notice from the outset that these are two positive cards, the Lovers and the Sun, generally resulting in a very scary and frightening card, the Ten of Swords. But I'm going to try to kind of talk through how we get there, maybe under the heading of too much of a good thing. So all three of these cards have to do with duality and binaries and doubleness. And in some ways, this is obvious, and in other ways it's not. But we can really explore this through looking at a few different tarot cards. And so I'm going to share my screen now and start with the Lovers. We've been seeing the Lovers throughout all of Gemini season so far. We've seen Gemini 1 and 2, probably talked about a few of these. So I wanted to pull up a few options that we might not have taken a close look at yet, because I do think that they're applicable to this specific Decan. Generally, in general, we would interpret the Lovers, in addition to perhaps a connection or attraction, as choice and duality, having two sides of something that are not yet united, not yet unified, but could be complementary, could also be opposite. You know, we always say in relationship and love, opposites attract. On the far left here, we have the Russian deck. And this depiction of the Lovers I like because you have the sun and the moon above those two figures, which I encourage you to remember when I reference it back in just a moment. In the middle, we have Micah Ulrich's deck, where you have a female figure and a male figure dancing. They do both have skeleton faces, but if you start going, you know, down to the legs, you see that the female figure has flesh on her bones and the male figure does not. There is also a piece of fruit in the bottom left-hand corner near the woman, and a fungi near the man on the right. So again, pointing to that duality and almost opposites element of the lovers. And then finally, on the far right in the science deck, we have binary stars, which are when there are two stars that are in a delicate dance of a gravitational pull, and they keep each other in the same orbit, and a solar system springs up around them, like the equivalent of having two suns. What was that?
They co-orbit each other.
Yes, they co-orbit each other. And there's an infinity symbol in the middle of this too, which is very interesting, referencing the eternality of the sun card. We have, the stars here being in an infinite loop as well. So those three cards are really poignant, I think, to remember as we move on to looking at the sun. Again, we have seen this before in Aries 2, which is the decan of the sun's exaltation. And when I talked about the sun in Aries 2, we focused on the common themes in those cards of sunflowers and of children. These are a few that we might not have referenced before, but they bring out a different side of the sun card. As T. Susan Chang mentions in her book, 36 Secrets, the traditional depiction of the sun in tarot actually had two children or two figures on it. They were twins. They were Castor and Pollux. But in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, yes, Elsa is also holding up an example of this right now. In the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, Pamela Coleman Smith decided to put only one child figure on the horse. In this presentation here on the far right is an example of the sun card from a traditional deck as well. And what I find interesting is that if you didn't know this was the sun card, you might think it was the lovers. It looks a lot like the lovers. So even though it's the sun, there is an element of two. And what does that mean? Why two? Why two with the sun? We, as traditional astrologers, have a philosophical understanding of the sun as the one and the moon as the other, or the many. And when it comes down to it, we have a hard time conceptualizing how the sun could be two different figures, could be twins. But that's why I put up on the far left here, the science deck version of the sun, which is called the duality of light. So in physics, we have the concept of light, which is, we know what that is. We know what light is. But if you break it down, light can be both a particle and it can also be a wave. So there are two different physical manifestations of light that are united under the one concept of light. And so just like there are these two concepts of Castor and Pollux, there is a word I'm going to butcher. I believe it's Diokitos. They're referred to as one. Castor and Pollux, the twins, are referred to as one. So that's a little bit interesting when you think about it, and almost a natural correlation between the lovers and the sun, that there would be two united eventually as one.
Yeah, like once the one brother died and they started to share their infinity life.
Yes.
Between heaven and hell, or whatever it is, their names changed from Castor and Pollux to a one-word name, and we'll put it on the screen.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to pronounce. We're not great at ancient Greek.
I love that this is called the duality of the light, because if you flip back to the card that has the sun and the moon on top, we see that, handing over from the Lord of Light to the Lord of Darkness, and that sort of duality that's, depicted here, even in the infinity, or that eternal, because we also think of sun as the one, the selection force, but we also think of it as like what's constant and eternal and that kind of a thing. So
yes.
It's really beautiful to see it reflected here in both the sun and the moon, and also just what did they call the sun again, the science deck?
The duality of light.
Duality of light. So perfect. My God.
It's super interesting. Also, I love this card and the the colorful
I was
vibe
gonna
here.
say it's so mercurial, the background of just like the multiplicity of color, like overlaying on top of itself or whatever is so perfect for this Decan.
Yes.
It's interesting that we see that in these science cards again and again, that they probably have a strong understanding of these decans.
Exactly.
Putting them together. Yeah.
And I think that it speaks as well to those sometimes who might not have the language to speak woo, to speak very spiritual language. There are concepts and theories here that illuminate them in a really practical and down-to-earth way that can be very enriching. I mean, reading about this card specifically, the sun, seriously illuminated my understanding of this decan and this relationship between these cards, because you know, we have the lovers again, which is lovely, the sun, usually quite lovely. How the heck do we get
the Lord of Ruin
to the Lord of Ruin? I basically try to pick from every single one of the decks I have here to show how consistently these cards are referenced as very difficult. There's always somebody with a bunch of swords in their back, you know, sometimes a little bit of death off scene, but it's there. And yeah, trigger warning again, there's lots of violence. For some reason, it makes me not question why Gemini is such an unpopular sign with all the trigger warnings we have to go through here in these tarot associations. But yeah, essentially too much of a good thing. How did we get from the lovers and the sun to the 10 of swords and the Lord of Ruin? Where nines are usually that pinnacle period right before the culmination of an effort at the end of every suite of minor arcana cards. The 10s are, as Chang calls them, oversaturation, or too much of that element. And so what we have here is too much of the suite of swords, which the swords are generally a less favorable suite of tarot cards than any other suite. So I interpret the 10 of swords in my practice as being collapse or depression to the point of catatonia. And often, especially recently, ever since the Great Resignation that began late last year, as literal burnout, complete burnout of a certain nature. So you can think of this in relation to the lovers and the sun as, for the lovers, the choice is paralyzing. There are two options here. They are paralyzed by the choice in the 10 of swords. The sun is blinding and it provides no place to hide, to recuperate and to rest. Again, that might be how this figure got on the ground with swords in his back. But what I want to encourage you to note is that these figures, there's no blood. There's no blood coming out of these figures, so they're not actually dead. Even if you pull this card, and people might be afraid of it, T. Susan Chang mentions in her book almost as much as the death card. This card strikes fear into people when they see it in their reading. But they're not actually, it's not actual death. It's not usually physical stabbing. It's exhaustion. It's of a mental sort, because the suite of swords is about, it's associated with air, and thus mentality, intellect, and socializing. So just complete exhaustion.
Yeah, so, one thing I wanted to just add to that just like made me think of this right away is like, how do we get from the sun and the lovers to this figure on the ground, like dead and alone, or stabbed in the back? Let's say maybe they're not dead, right? They're stabbed in the back, or there's some kind of like suffering and inability, you know. And I just think of like the people that we love the most, that we become the most familiar with, are the people that can hurt us the most.
Absolutely.
And if you think of like last time we talked about breakups, I'm not saying like it has to be interpreted like this. I'm just saying like, if you're selecting something and you can only choose one, and you have to like kill off the other, or the people that, you know, like if you think of divorce or something, it's probably the most horrific thing that a lot of people go through, and that's being inflicted upon the other. I think what was I reading? Something about like, I don't know, something about like defamation or some kind of like suing, like legal thing, or someone being turned in. That's what it was. Someone being turned in for like tax evasion, happens some extraordinarily high number, like 80% of the time, by a disgruntled spouse.
Yes.
And so I'm just thinking about like that dichotomy too, of like, it's so blinding when we meet the other that we don't realize that that could be like that's when we feel the most backstabbed, right? Is if we're hurt by the lover, or if we're not selected by the lover or something like this, you know? So that was like my first like quick thought, so that I just wanted to sort of add when we were talking about the selection of the sun.
But when you think about like long-term things, this is the first thing I'm saying in this video. I've been really quiet so far. But when you think of the placement of Gemini in the Thema Mundi, being the 12th house of the cosmos, being this difficult place of self-undoing. And when you think of long-term things that are, that we are trying, for instance, we're trying to leave behind a part of our lives. And it's not only until we decide, Gemini lovers card word, that we want to go in a determined direction, that we really truly see what we are about. If we can really exert that, if that is meant to be our destiny, if becoming that particular thing is even in the cards for us, so to say. Not to say that everything is predetermined, but sometimes we make choices for things that are against our nature because we feel they might be safer, because we never learn to listen to our intuition. And so I feel like when we make a lot of these choices without realizing, and in the nine of swords, we kind of get woken up by these nightmares from the past that tell us, wait a minute, I know I am going through this, you know?
Yeah.
I know what I have to look back on in order to understand where these triggers are coming from. But it's not until the 10 that we can actually leave that reality behind us. And it's the process of letting it die. It's painful because it's like it's like when Harry Potter goes to die in okay, spoilers, I guess, but in the end of Deathly Hallows, and Voldemort kills him with the Avada Kedavra, but doesn't really. And then he goes to the beyond, or the mid-path, represented by the King Cross Station, and sees Voldemort lying there, the piece that was in him. And so that was the 10 of swords from Harry's perspective. He died. He was dead on the ground, literally. But Voldemort was also stricken and flew backwards and fell back on the ground when that happened. And something changed. Both of them were still alive, but something fundamental changed in that moment, where something that Harry was carrying the whole series was left behind. And then suddenly Voldemort could die.
Yeah, it reminds me of Mercury as the Lord of the Underworld here, just like how mercurial this actually is, because in order to go into the underworld, someone must die or be killed. And it's that idea of like, if we're waking up in the middle of the night by some horrific nightmare, like here we know like what we must slay, what dragon we must slay, or what thing we must kill, or what choices we must make to sort of move on to the new thing. And if you think about the Thema Mundi, like you can't take anything with you in the death portal. And if you're about to be born anew, everything must die, really.
Yep.
And the sun is really selective in that sense, but not because in the 10 of swords, it will select, or not only because it will select one and the other will die, but because everything that is not the one thing that has been selected is fading away really quickly. It's like when you see an image on YouTube or whatever of a bomb being tested, and you see all the trees around it going like, and just being blown away. That's kind of what the sun is doing there.
That's the sun.
With ideals that are no longer serving you. It illuminates so quickly, and you get around, and you get to have consciousness around so many issues because you've made one choice, that it feels like everything else is really heavy when you're trying to manifest that one thing into reality.
Yeah, like KD, what you said too, just about the sun, like there is nowhere to hide here. Everything is shown. What you have to cut off is, you know, pronounced.
Yep.
You must select the new thing, or you must die to go to the underworld, like the Harry Potter story.
And
so
it's
just like nothing can hide or whatever. That's all. Just like it's this full blast illumination, like KD said so beautifully, is blinding.
And it's not like the tower, because the tower is something that you don't expect, is something that comes up out of circumstance. You're there living your life and then boom. But the sun is actually someone that you decide on. It's not something that you embody that reaffirms your true essence. And so everything else that doesn't must die. And I feel like the Gemini card really is that choice, that moment of choosing one of the twins as the path, as the one who's going to continue the legacy, basically.
Right. And it, as a minor arcana card, it really literally is the end of the suite of swords. So just like with every other suite, it's the end of something. But again, it's not a surprise because you've had the whole, theoretically, the whole suite of swords to work on it and to think about it and to follow the process around. But it's now at its end, it's now at its closure. And, you know, as other swords will attest, it's not always an easy or pleasant experience. What I wanted to do real quickly is read a couple quotations from T. Susan Chang's book that also really hammer this home. And I'm going to pull up a couple of cards to draw your attention to with this one. So she says, when the twins are sun and moon, referring to Castor and Pollux, but also check out that sun and moon in the lovers. When the twins are the sun and moon, as they often are, only one can reign in the sky at once. So forced choice, taking a side when both cannot coexist, is a core concept of this decan. Forced choice. I love that.
Yeah.
Another quote, if the sun represents the rational and the lovers represents the power of choice, their combination can be the type of over-intellectualized decision process that leads us to disregard our intuition. Again, this is why the Lord of Ruin results from two beautiful cards. It's because it's just too much. It's too much. You need to defragment the hard drive. And if you don't, you're going to be in collapse.
I love that. Yeah, defragmenting.
Yeah, exactly. And there is no choice here. There is no more thinking about it. You've already been stabbed in the back, or you're already dead, or whatever it is. You may not want, in the moment of death, you may not want to leave everything behind, but you don't have a choice.
No choice. No choice. Three other cards real briefly I wanted to highlight. Again, a different perception of the Ten of Swords that I find interesting and delightful. The cat. I love these cards, the cat cards. This cat has gotten themselves in a bad situation. They've climbed to the top of the screen with their claws out, and now they don't know what to do. Where do they go? They're at the end. They could either rip the screen, or they could try to do a gymnastic double twist off the back of the screen and land, or try to land. But I find that kind of like stuck cat very appropriate sometimes for where people find themselves when the Ten of Swords comes out.
Yeah, and also just Gemini, like I feel like cat and cat-like behavior could really like look like Mercury and Gemini.
Yeah.
It's quick, it's playful, it has some aloofness to it, like we've seen in the other decans. So yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that. In the middle, we have the science deck again. This is another kind of like mind-blowing moment for me, but the companion guide to this deck talks about uncertainty being the fact that in physics especially, they're constantly trying to reduce the level at which they are assessing material items in order to understand the mechanisms of the universe. So to have these big ideas, you have to deduce. But somewhere around the 1920s, a physicist came up with the equation that's listed in the middle. And I will say it's super interesting. There's a Saturn symbol in there. I don't know what that means in mathematic language, but it's very interesting. In the 20s, this physicist discovered that it was impossible at a certain level to tell the location or the speed of a subatomic particle. So it was basically like the end. You can't discover any more about this. We can't go any deeper. We can't go any smaller. That's it. You know, that's the end of it. And a lot of scientists found this quite depressing. You know, it's like saying that we can't discover anymore. We can't go any further. But I think in this card, there is a whisper of how one can handle the Ten of Swords in life, which is acceptance that it's time to move on. You know, it's like you can't go any more in depth. You can't dig any deeper. You're done.
And once you get stabbed in the back, or when someone stabs you in the back, right? It's like you can have all the feelings and all the thoughts and all the dramas of how it went down, but there's no more being friends or whatever. Like it's over. Like when you realize that like your nightmares from the 9 have come true and you're stabbed in the back, or you have to take this journey to this new definition of the relationship or in life, this new path, this new Cancer, thema mundi. It doesn't matter how much you've thought about it and how much toil and how much heartache or how much whatever is there. You just, like in this 10 of Swords picture from the mother piece, you're just throwing yourself off this cliff into the ocean. You're kind of saying like, well, I got stabbed in the back. There's no more there to sort of pontificate if this person can be my friend or my lover anymore. They did me like that or whatever.
Well, this is a really cool card. The reason why I included this is because there's another myth that is a little bit tied into this, which is there were these Athenian priestesses who were in a temple, and there was an army approaching who was going to rape and pillage them, possibly enslave or force some of them into wedlock. And like many priestesses to goddesses at the time, they'd taken a vow of celibacy. So rather than let themselves be raped, pillaged, enslaved, they threw themselves off the cliff into the ocean. It's a little bit hard to see from the card, but these women are supposed to be relieved and happy as they're throwing themselves into the ocean. They would rather make the ultimate sacrifice in order to feel that relief, albeit with a dramatic flourish of preserving their vows, of preserving their values and their morals,
And that's true identity, I think. That's being at its finest, because it's the sun.
It's the sun. Yes, exactly. And it's the mercurial idea of like plunging yourself into the underworld happily. And like what Austin said about, smiling as the executioner's sword comes down. It's like you get the autonomy of making that choice in this case, in this card or whatever. And gladly, you know what I'm saying? Like obviously in this case, gladly, because the alternative is excruciating or whatever it is, but they
saw a way out and they chose it. Then it's like preserving your identity no matter the choices that you have to make, right?
And when you're forced into a choice, when you are forced into a choice, you can preserve the parts of yourself that are the most important, maybe through a very tragic scenario, but
if both are tragic and you're between a rock and a hard place, you choose death upon this like type of selection where you eagerly go into this like mercurial space of selecting.
I'm not opening up to the public, but guys, this is real. This shit is real. It gets real.
It's real. It's real.
It's been real. So thank you for putting this together, KD, as usual, like doing so much justice with the cards and bringing them together via T. Susan Chang's wisdom as well as your own. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that. Really good coverage. Do we want to say anything else about it?
I really appreciate in T. Susan Chang's book, just as another shout out, is that she does address a lot of times about the ways to work with these cards. And in my, kind of thinking about this, I really grasped onto that idea also that we talked about with the last card of, okay, you have to make a choice, but decide what's most important to you and let it go, just let it go. So, and I feel like an expert on this Decan because I have 4 planets here.
Right. I was wondering if you wanted to share that or not. This is the KD Decan, and happy birthday again, KD.
Right.
David, do you want to are we ready to like go towards the Picatrix? Do you want to read that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can read the passage. So it says, there rises in the 3rd phase of Gemini a man clothed in mail, with a bow, arrows, and quiver. This is a face of audacity, honesty, division of labor, and consolation. This is its form. So we see again a warrior here, clearly, and he's dressed up with arrows. I want to mention that sword is different than arrow because you can send an arrow much further, and it's something that you shoot, and it goes using the air to reach its target. The Bible uses arrows as a satanic kind of artifice, in the sense of flaming arrows being thrown by Satan onto our minds. And that's kind of what I see here in this image, is that ability that people need to be conscious of this decan, that words have meanings and that you should really give meaning to what you're saying you are, by really, dressing up like the part, being who you are, being who you say you are, basically.
That's right.
I feel like that passage is kind of giving us a little bit of that vibe too. And division of labor, honesty, audacity, those are solar qualities, but the division of labor part really speaks to that, making decisions and really being assertive and excluding of everything else, and being like, okay, you are like Adam naming the animals. You're responsible for giving things their function, but in a way that's like, it's division of labor. You're like, okay, this is your responsibility. This is your responsibility, not mine, in a lot of ways, I feel like people that have the sun in this decan and manifest this kind of energy that's being depicted here in the Picatrix could have that sense of, what am I? Again, because the sun is illuminating everything that's not you. Those people, they might be acutely aware of the things around them that threaten them, that their sense of self, and they are constantly probably the ones that have the sun there bombarded with that opportunity of either I make this choice or I see everything that I hold dear kind of being destroyed. So like we get those choices sometimes in life, but these people, I feel like Katie will be able to tell more, but I feel like these people really feel their lives threatened when the ideal of who they are to themselves is threatened. They are not ones to just abide by what life or circumstance is trying to give to them. It's like, well, okay, independence or death, basically.
Yeah, and the airiness
That's
of
my
the
motto.
arrows, like really arrows too, are like little swords, right? Like they're just have more precision and more air-like quality and more stealthiness, and they kind of when I'm thinking about them, they sort of defy boundaries. Like we're talking about like the swords is like cutting and setting boundaries, like cutting off or setting boundaries or whatever. And like an arrow can like hit you from wherever. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you might not be able to see it. You might not be able to control like what. So it's again like that airy quality of just boundaries and form and formlessness, and like the choice of the sun illuminating versus like kind of what's hidden by the underworld and that passage. That mercurial air-like passage is basically what I'm getting at.
So yeah, I think that also reflects the kind of protection that you become kind of impregnable to other people's arrows and swords, even by making that by making it a statement like, I am this is what I am not, and this is a way to protect yourself as well against accusations and other people's artifices against you, and that's it's like having a high moral ground, I would say. Even.
And the Lord of Light and the Lord of Dark, back to the Thema Mundi, the sun opposite Saturn, and we Austin talks about like there are like alternative rulerships for the decans, and it's either between Sun or Saturn here, and they reflect each other. Like when you illuminate the choice or see everything but what you don't want to be, or they have this kind of dual relationship, and we're passing, like Austin said, from the Lord of Light to the Lord of Darkness, and that sort of who am I, and those forced choices happen in that space of illumination to the point of like blindingness, or the dark that we're searching through or don't have the light to see, or something like this. So
I find that so interesting. I've heard this decan, and I believe it's referenced in Agrippa, that this is a figure that loves to mock and to jape and jest in a sort of a mean way. And
that's explaining a lot then about you,
right,
Katie.
right.
No.
but it's also I've had in readings for myself too, astrologers mention the potential for this decan to correlate to scandal, which very much feels Mercury and Saturn to me, but I can also see the sun as the great despot. This also is a very applicable ruler with alongside Mercury for this decan.
Absolutely. Just quick shout out back to bringing it back around to Norwalk again. Agrippa in the 3 books of occult philosophy, Eric Purdue was there. And like, I got to like behold like Eric Purdue talking to like Austin Coppock and like Christopher Warnock and stuff. So that was just like a treat. And if you guys don't know, Eric Purdue just released the 3 books of occult philosophy collection. So if you can
check it out.
Favor. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you both so much for.
Is this a good time to talk about celebrities, because there is a direct correlation to what we were just talking about?
Please. That's what I was just going to do, is segue into that. So thank you. Yeah, take it away.
There are a lot of figures with their sun in this decan that are no stranger to controversy, that are just, they get people riled up by speaking, also very mercurial. So in that group, we have Donald Trump, unfortunately. I should have maybe said a trigger warning. We have Jordan Peterson, which is an awful, no, okay, not going to share, cut that out. I'm not going to say awful.
Okay,
we have Jordan Peterson, who is a thinker, a cultural thinker, who maybe I don't perfectly agree with. We have Laura Ingraham. If you're not familiar with her, good on ya. If you are, sorry. She is a Fox News commentator on the right in the US. She's quite incendiary. We have Che Guevara, also not a stranger to controversy. Shia LaBeouf, who especially recently has been embroiled in some scandals, domestic violence scandals. And Tupac Shakur. I guess you could say he's controversial in the sense that, I don't know, he was in trouble with the law occasionally and might not be dead. I don't know. There's the resounding.
Oh, right, the idea, right?
Yeah,
yeah, that's a good thought there. I like that.
And then Edward Snowden, who I think you wanted to say something about, Elsa.
I didn't necessarily want to say anything about it. That was the example that I was most like drawn to bringing up or whatever, and it goes along with what you're saying about controversial figures and all of that. But yeah, I was just thinking the Che Guevara, Edward Snowden mentions for just some other-sidedness to the like Trump or whatever.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's not all on one side or the other. It's not all one political ideology, clearly, but they rile people up by virtue of speaking.
And then we also have the twin Venus Williams.
Oh yes.
And then the Paul McCartney, who it's weird, but also he's like controversial too, because people he's not dead, or he has a body double, or
right.
Just the kind of like thing with him and John or whatever, so he's like also, I think, goes in that like dualistic kind of like nature, as we brought the other ones up. Cool. We also have Paula Abdul and Frank, Lionel Richie,
Kendrick Lamar, who's basically the best. He's my favorite rapper of all time. And his linguistic skill is undeniable. Like his skill with language specifically is amazing, also very mercurial. And then another favorite of mine is Gene Wilder, who played Willy Wonka in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I mean, he has some crazy Gemini eyes and some facial expressions that are so Mercury.
Oh my God, when they're going Gemini. Through like on the boat scene or whatever, like, when his face is like flat or like the lights playing like on his face.
I was actually scared.
Yeah.
Oh, scary. It was so scary when I was a kid. I was like, oh my God, it's still scary. Like, holy crap. Yes, so good one. Like that visual is very like Gemini in this second.
And then the Olsen twins.
Right, another set of twins. Yeah, exactly. Macklemore, Blake Sheldon. I'm just kind of like wrapping up a little bit. Chris Pratt. Yeah, so I think that was a good
coverage.
Synopsis. Yeah, synopsis.
Word.
So I guess, yeah, thanks. And in closing, I just wanted to mention again that we're going to be putting out a video this week a little bit more about it, but we are starting our book club study group with Demetra George's Volume 2 book, David, Matt, and I think KD, you're going to be not like a host or whatever, but you're going to be there. So we're excited to start that here in June. June 22nd will be our first one, but don't worry about it if you can't join like right away. If you're reading the book and you're like a person like me, okay? If you're reading the book and you've already blazed all the way through it, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be like on task with us on this like monthly thing. You can join whenever, even if you've read the book multiple times, and we're just going through it like slowly, discussions, chart examples, going through the exercises together, just to make it fun and like share the joy of this book and its publications, because we've all been waiting and eagerly reading the book. So we just thought it would be fun to do with you all. So we are starting that. So at any time you're watching this video up through 2023 for sure, you can totally join us over on Patreon. We're going to be for the better part of the year and a little bit more going over that together as a group. So I think that's all I really wanted to mention. Do you guys want to let us know your website, what you have available, projects you have going on?
Yeah, sure. I'm in the first place Astrology. You guys can check me out on the pages on Instagram and Facebook, also my website, in the first place astrology.com. And when you go there, you have my prices available in the English translated page. I have an English version and a Portuguese version with the, exchange kind of corrected. You can contact me via email. You can't book directly on my website. You have to contact me for that in one of those platforms. So go check my services there and then come back with whatever you need. I do tutorings as well, which is not there, but I'll insert it shortly.
Awesome. And everything obviously is going to be in the links below, but KD, you have anything going on?
Nothing going on right now, still processing NORWAC, and I'm also getting a chance to kind of deploy some of the techniques that I learned there and get to make connections with people. But as always, my books are open. My website is kddayton.com. And I also would love to hear from people if you're interested in tutoring or just meeting to chat. Really excited to join the Demetra study group, because that seminar style of learning it's my jam. So being able to share and discuss and chat with everyone, encourage that as well.
Informal, like it's super inspiring to keep you going on task if you're not motivated, or if you are someone who crams, it's nice to go through it a little bit slower and hear other people's ideas. It's always illuminating and it's always like super memorable, and it just kind of gets it in your bones a little bit. So I'm really glad you're going to be there too. I'm very excited about it.
We're only doing it because we know the good that it did us,
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly.
That's how we all met. And like, so we have so many friends meeting like that, and things like NORWAC and, just like the Astro community. It's very inspiring and very encouraging, and it's more than just that, right? It really helps us along in our own personal studies. It's different than coursework. So, and it's a super important part of integration, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, join us for that. Thank you all again for being here for Gemini 3. Again, having a great time doing this with you all. So emojis, what do we want to use? We didn't discuss that.
Oh, drop a sword.
Oh yeah.
Since we're finishing the sword suit right now, drop a sword.
You can drop 10 swords, just like lining it up. Drop something. Drop something for us below. Basically, just let us know you're here. Let us know you're watching. Comments, questions, your placement in the Decans, ideas that we didn't discuss that you find relevant here. Please let us know. Just engage with us in the comments. We absolutely love to hear from you. So
coming up next, we have Cancer 1.
Oh, I know. It's so exciting. To be honest, it's so exciting going into the Cancer Decade. KD, do you want to take us out with the poem T. Susan Chang illustrates in her book?
Yeah, sure. So this is an excerpt from a poem called Love Among the Ruins by Robert Browning. When I do come, she will speak not, she will stand, either hand on my shoulder, give her eyes the first embrace of my face, ere we rush, ere we extinguish sight and speech, each on each. In 1 year, they sent 1 million fighters forth, south and north, and they built their gods a brazen pillar high as the sky, yet reserved 1,000 chariots in full force, gold of course. O heart, O blood that freezes, blood that burns, earth's returns. For whole centuries of folly, noise, and sin, shut them in, with their triumphs and their glories and the rest, love is best.
Thank you. Sending love to all y'all. Good job for getting through Gemini, and we will see you soon. Ciao.
Bye.
Mataya matao kako samayo na bekena soba da soba kena mataiba nakamati ma na bekena soba and soba ataiba nabe aujuno ba ikana kamaya da onga Koyo Okoyo Masena Mata ibe kana sabaso Inakina Tabaine Toyokas Inbayatoma Watabaike Dio no makano yo ba sono me yabagorina Kamoyara go yimi on my way go by Dio no makano yo ba sono me yabagorina